Welcome to Chris and Jen in the Morning.
Where it's always morning somewhere.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Jen. We are so excited to have you with us today. We are here to celebrate Pride Month and talk about allyship today.
Yes. Yeah. Last week, I shared my coming out story, my what I wished I would have known stuff. And in the conversation, several times you brought up, being an ally and how you can show up and how you do show up. So I thought that would be a great thing for us to talk about in this month. So we're going to talk about that. But as always, we're going to start with our gratitude first.
Yes. And I can kick us off with gratitude. This week I have been battling a terrible headache that lasted like the entire week. And once I finally started feeling better and I was reflecting, I just thought, I am incredibly grateful to have so many people in my life who I can count on to help support me, whether they're a part of my personal friend network or whether they're a part of my professional care network. I was able to go see a chiropractor who cares deeply about how I feel and my quality of life. And just to be able to have that in my life, I certainly don't take for granted. And I also was able to go see a massage therapist who, also truly cares about me and how I feel. And, taking the time to put into the service that they're providing to actually help me feel better. I realize that's like a privilege to get to have that a part of, just humanity in general. So I just am feeling really grateful for the shared connection of humanity and that I get to experience that.
It's great. And it's great having people who are invested in care, because then it's not just like checking a box when they're taking care of you. It's like,
I certainly have had some of that. In life. So I don't take for granted the fact that there are people I can rely on who have expertise and can actually choose to use their gift to help others.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I hope you're feeling better.
I am. I'm feeling better. What about you? What are you grateful for this week?
So I am grateful for this week. There are a lot of artists and a lot of storytellers who have made talking about pride and kind of the components of the LGBTQ movement over the years into pieces of artwork and books that can be shared with young children just to help inform and educate them. So a couple of those are this book called Stonewall. It's a great picture book that helps people understand about the uprising and revolution of the LGBTQ movement. It was written by Rob Sanders, illustrated by Jamie Kristoff. It's a really good one if people haven't seen it.
I love that.
There's also this really great one that talks about Harvey Milk and how the rainbow flag came to be part of the LGBTQ movement. It is written by Rob Sanders and illustrated by Stephen Salerno, I think is how you pronounce his last name. And then the last one that I have, I really like because it was almost a form of protest when they put this out. And so it's called A Day in the Life of Marlon Bundo.
Yes, I know this book.
And I hear that you have a copy of this in your house as well.
Sure do.
It's actually written by Marlon Bundo with Jill Twiss and illustrated by E.J. Keller. So if you don't know, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver helped produce this in a mass way to help people understand LGBTQ movements, as well as how sometimes there's just people who don't get it and can sometimes be little stinky bugs. So highly recommend that one if you're looking for comedic relief. Yes.
I appreciate that you are sharing these. I am excited. I haven't read the first two, so I'm excited to read them. And I don't know, maybe we can get permission to do a storybook time.
Yeah, that could be fun. I would love that. So let's jump into allyship. I think what I'm interested, because we did touch on it in last week's episode, what does allyship mean to you whenever you think about it, whenever you hear it, see it, how does that look?
Yeah. I think before I tell you what it means to me, I think I want to tell you when we talk about allyship, some of the feelings that I have. And I'm just guessing that a lot of other people can relate to this. I know I shared with you, sometimes I just get really awkward when the topic of allyship comes up. I had this amazing human that I met while we were on our trip who worked for this place that we stopped in and did an experience at. And he was kind of the tour guide of the experience. And he said, I was wearing my Always Proud shirt. And he said, and thank you for being proud of me. And not because I am feeling awkward about him or anything about him, but just because the topic I somehow always feel awkward about.
Yeah.
Like, I'm on the outside looking in, and do I have a right to talk about these kinds of things, which I don't even know why I think that. But it's like the thought that pops into my head,
Yeah.
then I just get kind of awkward, and I'm then afraid that my awkwardness is translating about the topic instead of just me as a human who is generally shows up that way about all kinds of things. And so I share that story just to say, like, I think I'm not alone in that. I think that other people also feel like, oh, maybe I don't have a right to call myself an ally. I have to be good enough. I have to figure out, like, what am I supposed to be doing? You know, if I'm not perfect at it, if there are times I screw up, then, I shouldn't like sully the concept of ally with, what I'm bringing to the table. Like, there's just this level of intimidation. And of course, like, I don't acknowledge all of that for myself because it sounds not right or sort of ridiculous when I say it. But I think for me, pausing to acknowledge that helps make the space to say, I should really work through that because I am proud to be an ally. I
Yeah.
have so many people throughout all areas of my family, friends, life circle that are in some way a part of the LGBTQIA family that I feel just richer for being able to be a part of that. And I think instead of me looking at it like I'm on the outside of this kind of club that I just sort of get to ancillarily look in on, like I am a part of this club, no matter how I identify.
Yeah.
I think to me, that's part of what allyship means. It's coming to that place of like, it's not an us versus them, it's a we thing. And I'm here to feel all of the feelings. I think what I also really appreciate is that you and I can have conversations where you talk about how you struggle with how to handle certain things. And I'm like, okay, well, of course, like everybody struggles with how to handle certain nuanced situations. But like, just because you happen to be gay doesn't mean that you somehow know how to navigate all of the complexities.
Exactly.
And so why am I thinking that I need to be perfect at that in order to be able to call myself an ally?
Right. I know that we speak about allyship in the sense of the LGBTQ plus community because Pride Month and such, but it is much bigger than that, right? Like the allies are needed in all marginalized groups. And so I by no means feel like I am an expert or feel like I have all the right answers or know the right actions to take. But I've been listening to this book called The Savvy Ally written by, I want to get her name right, Jeannie Gainsbourg. And she actually talks about how if you wait for perfection, if you wait to feel like you are an expert on these types of things, you will never get started because it never feels that way. And she is somebody who started her journey knowing nothing. She talks about how she wanted to get involved. She thought of herself as had she been born or been part of the women's movement, like what she was reading a book that inspired her to really look at how she would have lived in that time. And then I looked up and saw all of these things going on with the LGBTQ plus community. And so that was her catalyst to go start getting involved. She didn't have anyone within her family that identified that way. She didn't have any like close friends or colleagues who identified, but she felt she needed to help. She needed to be part of it. So she goes on this journey of learning. We all make mistakes. We all say things that aren't right. And it's like being present and being open to being corrected and educated on what the right things are to say. And then pulling that through. It's not like, oh, I'm sorry, and don't change the behavior. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, and how can I start making sure I incorporate this into my day to day? And you and I have talked about it before. Like a lot of this just comes down to people wanting to be seen as humans, most importantly.
That's just it. And, when I think about what it means to be an ally, I think it starts with empathy, like true empathy. It starts with being able to take yourself out of your own shoes and put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And to do that, you have to be willing to let go of the things that you think you know, just even for a moment. Like if you just put them in a box to the side, you can pick them back up when you're finished with the exercise. So setting them aside doesn't threaten the beliefs that you hold, but like give yourself the opportunity to truly be open-minded, to explore what might it be like to stand in somebody else's shoes and like what really matters. Because I think, in the context of, Pride Month, talking about allyship, I think we place far too much emphasis on the gender or sexual preferences of the LGBTQI community. And I think that's really unfortunate. I know, I think I said last time we talked about this, like, you are my friend and you also happen to be gay. You are not
Yeah.
my gay friend.
Right.
Being gay does not define you as a person. It is a part of who you are. And like, it certainly means that there are things that the ways that you think, things that you think that I never even had to think about, like just even thinking about some of the basic rights, like insurance for your life partner, because you can't get married in certain places. These are not things that I even had to like grapple with or
Right.
question from an empathy standpoint, taking myself out of my own shoes
Yeah.
and putting myself in somebody else's shoes. I think allyship starts with a willingness to be empathetic. And if you approach it from that lens, then I feel like you have more grace for yourself in not feeling like you have to be perfect at it,
Yeah.
but that you're open to learning, you're asking the questions, you're challenging what you think and others think. And, I think my tendency would be to like look to you to say, okay, well, you just tell me what I should think. And that's not really the right way either. Because, while certainly listening is a super important and primary part
Yeah.
of the journey, it doesn't mean that as an ally, you can't have original thoughts or a say in things either.
Right. And I think to the point around people putting their own experiences aside and stepping into that place of empathy and understanding where other people come from. I know I try to help connect those dots for people whenever I'm engaging in those types of conversations, because people can say, "Oh, well, I'm supportive of gay marriage. I'm like all of these things," but then it's like, in the reality of it though, do you realize it's not something that's easily accessible, or it feels like it is
Exactly.
constantly on the chopping block for us? And so I think people generally have positive intent in engaging in the conversations, but I also think they don't understand like the nuances around some of the things and just helping people understand it. So I've had someone who has said that to me before, very supportive of, gay people being married. I don't know why it has to be such a big deal. And I was like, well, when political parties have turned over in the past, like, have you ever worried about your marriage being null and void? Because I have. That's been a real
Yeah.
concern of mine. And it's in those moments that I think people begin to start to see it's much more layered than just simply getting married. It's so much more than that. That's what I try to do when people are expressing like those opportunities for learning and engaging in those conversations, is finding ways to make it real for them. Because again, if you've never had to, or you've never experienced that, then your brain isn't going to go there.
It just
Mine
doesn't go
does.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think that allyship is like a continuum. I don't think it's a thing you achieve. I don't think it's certainly not a badge you wear. I don't think it's a thing that you achieve that once you've achieved it, like you've reached level 10 and now, you're
Right.
always at that level. I feel like it's a continuum, and how we show up, sometimes it's in that place of like, I just am open to learning something new. Sometimes it's in that place of I'm not blocking something. And that's kind of at one end of the continuum. And then at the other end of the continuum, I think it's, I am advocating. I am going out there and not just trying to like hold the line, but to try and advance the, whether it's rights or the way that people are thinking about things or
Yeah.
inclusiveness. And I do think that everybody has their own unique set of gifts. They are in their own place on the continuum, and they have their own way that they can show up as an ally. So there's a lot of times where I've thought, well, if I'm not like out standing on a box with a megaphone proclaiming in the middle of the street about rights, then I'm not a good ally.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that's a healthy way to think, because that's not everybody's place.
I do think that I'm all about taking action in ways that feel natural to you, like as you're getting started, because some people are really great writers, and so writing poems or articles, maybe people are artists and can create compelling artwork. Like, I think it's finding that way that you can support in a way that feels natural for you and can help engage in the conversation in a way that you feel connected to. And then I think that advocating piece, as you get more comfortable and as you learn more and as you are closer to those individuals or cultures or those communities, those things I think start to seep their way in. And then I think that's where you get more comfortable when you hear someone say something that you're like, I'm going to assume you did not mean what you just said, but here's how it landed. And they feel like they can engage in those conversations. But until you have like that experience and you have kind of those data points to pull back from, I do think it can be scary because you also don't want to misrepresent or misspeak on something.
Well, and I do think that we all need to be better at understanding each other's intent, then also not just showing up with intent, but doing the work to see how our intent lands. Like, because if all you walk through life with is intent, then you show up negligent a lot. So,
well, that's interesting. Haven't heard it put that way before.
I mean, I don't you think, like, if you just walk through life with intent, but you don't do anything to like really understand things outside of your own perspective, then you just kind of, it's kind of negligence at some point. I don't know. I think
I would agree. I think it goes back to that, if you say something and someone's like, oh no, that, I prefer these pronouns, or that's not how I refer to myself. I'll use an example outside of the LGBTQ community. I used to have a coworker who is a Black woman, and we were one time having a conversation and I referred to her as African American, and we had a very good relationship, and she very clearly was like, I am not African American. I'm American. I was born here. My parents were born here. I identify as Black. And so it was a learning opportunity for me because we had never like had that conversation before, but she was willing to engage and inform me. And so anytime like we were in spaces or having conversations like that, like I filed that away to know like that is her preference. That is how she would like to be referred to as if need be. And so that's always just stuck out to me as one of those. And this was like back in 2013, 2014, when I don't think a lot of those conversations were happening in larger spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being taught very specifically, like, you don't say Black, you say African American, because that is the appropriate, polite thing to do. And I don't know if something changed or if I just like was taught something that was never correct, probably. But like things like that is good intent, that being open. And I think showing up as a human that has empathy, that demonstrates compassion, invites people to be open with you so that you can understand a mile in their shoes. And so I wouldn't suggest that by you referring to her as African American, that's negligent.
No,
by any stretch of the imagination.
I continued, that would be.
Or not been interacted in a way that you just were never open to even having those kinds of conversations. Like, I think that's where negligence starts to kick in. And so I don't think allyship looks like just having good intentions and never doing anything about it.
Yeah.
But I do think that allyship looks like putting yourself out there outside your comfort zone, not waiting until you know everything, but educating yourself in the best way that you can, and then showing up and creating a safe space to be open. I think that works both ways. Generally, like if you're here to help support other people, you have great intentions and you have empathy, you can all walk along together, even if you have a variety of different ways that you think about things.
Yeah, I agree.
I think one of the things that you have said, and this may be a quote that you've got somewhere, but you talked a little bit about listening more than talking, which I know is something that, as an ally of multiple communities,
Yeah.
that I know has come up a lot. And as someone who has always gotten high marks for, social skills, even if those were passive aggressive marks, that feels like intimidating. Tell me what that looks like for you.
Yeah. So I think the quote that you were talking about is from this book, The Savvy Ally by Jeannie Gainsbourg. And she talks about in good intent should never be used to excuse disrespectful behaviors or rationalize hurtful comments. It's not a free pass for a person to say and do what they want because they didn't mean it that way. Your conversation should still focus on the impact of people's words and actions rather than the intent. However, you will shame and frighten people into silence if you do not allow them to use the language and information they have to ask questions and discuss concepts. And I think that is such an important piece in all of this is like we all come from different walks of life, different reference points, different things that have informed us in how to engage in conversations, ask questions, starting from different points. And if we don't allow people to ask questions, if we don't allow people to make mistakes and help correct them and show them the way, people are going to be afraid to engage. And then you and I have talked about this many times, but like sometimes it feels like people stand on opposite ends of a chasm and just yell at one another. And there's no movement being made because we're just yelling back and forth.
And then maybe it's the allies on like a little cliff in the middle between that, like yelling at both sides.
Right. Exactly. And so I think it's you can't be afraid to engage, but you also have to take what you've heard and what has been shared with you and put that into action to show that you are trying to show up. You are trying to engage in a way that is trying to move your understanding, your allyship within the community forward. Because I also think that they talk about allyship having 4 main pillars, which are yield, listen, learn, and action. And I think when all of those things come together, you do start to make progress and you can start to be a ally to communities.
Yeah.
But I like that they're called pillars because when you think about a pillar, right, like it's holding something up, you need all of these things to make it work, to be successful. Sometimes one may come easier. It may be easier for you to, allow people to step up into the spotlight and speak and create those opportunities for them, where maybe it's harder for you to feel like you can step into that spotlight and have those conversations, but you don't know until you start trying. You don't know until you start, you may walk a couple steps, trip and fall. I know I did in a very public way once upon a time. And I had a great coworker who messaged me on the side. Hey, you said this. I know that that is not what you meant. Do you want me to come back to you and so that you can correct yourself? And I was like, absolutely. And so I did. I was given the opportunity to correct myself, and there was no problem. Like I apologized, and I continued to pull that into the way that I engage in the conversation. And like you said, you can be part of groups and still get it wrong. I know I have many of times, but I also really care about people and I want to show up for them how they need me to show up for them.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where it just all comes back to empathy. Like you have to start with a place of empathy. I want to circle back to something that you said, which was allyship can look like showing up in ways that feel natural to you. One of the things I think you had shared with me years ago was that we were talking about books that we were reading. And I was like, oh, yeah, I love a good romance novel. And you had shared with me that like it's hard to find good romance literature where there are 2 same-sex partners in the story. And I think that becomes more and more common now, but certainly not as common. If you were to look at the percentage of books out there, they're not reflective of the population, which is, like interesting when you think about it. My first kind of dormant thought that I had was, oh, well, yeah, more people who are gay or lesbian or a part of the community, even expanding beyond that, should write books, like romance books, right? From their perspective. Because like, why would somebody who isn't a part of that community write a book? How would they understand that? And then like hearing things like your story about the obstacles that you had to overcome in life just to be who you really are, like putting then that burden back on you to be the one that helps that get normalized in society and show up in all these ways that we don't think about, like really unfair. And not that that dormant thought kind of crossed my mind from a negative place. It came from a positive place, a place of like, well, I have no right to, not that I'm a writer, but like if I was, I have no right to write about that. That's, you know. And so I do think that while allyship starts with empathy, it also starts with empowering yourself to have a seat at the table. You know, the work analogy that we heard so often, which is like, don't sit in the back of the room, pull
Right.
up a chair at the seat of the table. You know, I'm a big believer in the phrase, like, if you can see it, you can be it. And I think that like the female community really leaned into that. And I think even the Black community really leaned into that from a like a saying standpoint. There were a lot of like things that came out from an art standpoint, that and a creative standpoint, a career standpoint, but I don't really hear or see that so much with the LGBTQIA community. And it makes me kind of pause to think, what are ways that I can help other people see it so that they can be it? And
Yeah.
one very clear way that I think about is like, if you have no books to read about that you can relate to from a romance standpoint, how much more does that shame your, you know, your own feelings about if you're still like grappling with that and trying to come out and figure out who you are? So it's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if calling this a nuance seems very small and insignificant, but it's a big thing. Like when you talk about women, when you talk about the Black community, those are things that you can see. Like I mean,
It's true.
You see them and you can make assumptions and whether, you know, but those are things that people see and you can immediately identify with. Where in the LGBTQ plus community, someone has to be willing to say it. So like a lot of athletes not coming out, a lot of actors not coming out. Cause I do truly believe that, like, if you see that someone in a role that you could potentially be in one day yourself, like, I can do that. That can be me. But things that are done, you know, how you live your life outside of the public view or outside of like the working world or whatever, that's private. Not everyone feels comfortable sharing those things and wants. So I think, and let's be clear, like there were careers that were ruined because people did come out.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
It kind of like scares people from sharing those things. I think we are in a different time and place now. Do I think it's a perfect system currently? Nope. I still think we have a lot of work to do. But I do think like part of it is people, because like we talked about, like it's coming out, like accepting who you are, accepting how you show up, all of those things. And then it's like, you know, do I want to share this at work? Do I want to deal with whatever the fallout may be there? And you know, our brains just automatically associate things sometimes that don't necessarily seem connected. And so the perfect example that I have is I had a coworker one time who I had scheduled a meeting. We were in a conversation, and we were talking about like the weekend. And I had said my fiance at the time and used his name. I had never come out to this guy. I had never like had any conversations. I knew that he was married to a woman with children. Then afterwards, I was like, I don't know how we've never talked about that. My brain just starts like going into overdrive about it. And we were working on a project, had another meeting set up a couple days later, and he canceled it. He declined the meeting and was like, "Oh, sorry, something came up." Like it was something very benign, like not a lot of reason or rationale. Maybe my own insecurities, like whatever. But in my brain, I'm like, "Oh, what? Like, is he not okay with me being gay? Not that he ever said that, but not that he ever said that he was." Like, I just start going through all this. And then like he ended up reaching out to me later and was like, "Hey, so sorry about that." We got back into the conversation, like what we were working on. But I think it's sometimes those things that like, it also just like I said, you take some steps forward and then you feel like you take some steps back. It's like a dance.
Yeah.
Until you find the rhythm that makes you comfortable, and then,
Well,
you are who
there
you
was a
are.
period of time where there was a long period of time where in certain professions, women tried to hide by using a different name that
Right.
they were a woman, either even Disney movies based on that, like Mulan. Yeah, the same thing with race. I even know in my career, my time, people that have given people who are not white advice who have like names that can be interpreted as like ethnically associated to a
Mm-hmm.
certain race to just use a different name on their resume. And it's like grappling with this, what was probably started from a good intention piece of advice to help somebody like like not be able to bring race into the conversation when looking at a resume, like to be told that if I want to be considered for a job, I can't even use my own name. As a woman, that's a right that in my time, in my career, I either was too ignorant to realize I should be thinking about, or I just never had to think about
Yeah.
that I know women who came before me would have had to have thought about, but it's something that other people have to deal with. You talk about allyship in the broader sense of like all different kinds of communities. I think the thought that comes to my mind is there is so much that we can draw from all of these different communities. And while from from the LGBTQIA community, it's earlier on the spectrum of being able to get, equal rights and all of these things. There are things that we can kind of look back on and learn from.
Yeah.
And so as an ally, how do I reach into the perspective that I can bring to the table from things that I feel like I can more closely relate to say we're all just humans and we all kind of want some of the same things. So what are some of the questions I should be asking myself? What are some of the things I should be thinking about instead of taking for granted? And I do think that figuring out how to relate that back to something in myself helps me kind of connect the dots and
Yeah.
go, oh, okay, then it becomes a little more logical for me to start being more thoughtful
Right.
instead of just ignorantly showing up and saying things like, maybe you should use a different name on your resume. Maybe you should pretend like you're not gay at work so that people won't potentially want to work with you and you won't
Right.
get an advancement. Like that no one should ever have to feel that way, whether it's because they're of who they love
Right.
or how they identify or the color of their skin or, their gender or just any of that.
Yeah. But I also think, like, in those circumstances, let's just assume people had positive intent in providing that advice. What I find fascinating is how the um how the times have changed. And now it's no longer talking about, like, well, why is it that I, as the individual who are different, have to change? Why is it that you don't have to change? Why don't you have to change the way that you think about it? And I like how you said what you did about, like, relating it to things within your life or within your world, and how you can connect with it. And I think that goes to, like, the learning aspect of it. So if you find yourself in these spaces where these questions are being asked, or you're feeling like, oh, I don't really know what the right thing is to say, go educate yourself on it and go look at it from someone else's perspective. Go look at it from someone who is identifies as LGBTQIA. Go look at it from someone within a different community group. Like, because I think if you start to go look at things through those lenses, it can lead you down a path of questions that will help inform and educate you on how to engage. I also tell people, go make friends with these people, because it's very easy to disassociate when there's not skin in
Yeah.
the game, right?
Well, I think that's just it. And not that you should have a gay friend to be your gay friend. I've had a lot of people that I've met who are like, "Oh yeah, this is my gay friend," kind of like it's a collection. Like it's terrible. And yet I actually think that sometimes I came across that way, even though that was never my intention, just because of my own level of discomfort of how do I talk about these things and not feel awkward, which is something that as an ally I need to do better
Right.
about figuring out how to show up in a way that not just my intent, but how I'm coming across doesn't make other people feel uncomfortable. But I think, one of the things that's intimidating about educating yourself is if you don't know where to start, there's a lot of bad education out there. And if we take this back to like the conversation that you were having with your Black coworker, and you were referring to her as African American, and she said, I actually am not African American, I'm Black. My education growing up was that African American was the polite way to refer to Black people. And, so where do you go? I think it's intimidating to figure out where you go to educate yourself. And I don't know if you have any good advice or suggestions on how to make sure when people are looking to educate themselves that they're finding resources that, are thoughtful. I do think taking what you hear and kind of centering that from an empathy, we're all humans standpoint
Right.
is good. I'm grateful that I have many people in my life, including you, that I can get perspective from to help guide me in that journey. But what suggestions do you have?
I always recommend people go to like reputable organizations that are advocating for those rights, because generally they have great educational material. So a lot of like org type places, just for the purpose of they are people who are in the community, who are working on, bringing information in different perspectives. And when I say like go be part of the community, I'm not saying go be part of the community to have them educate you and teach you on it. It's so that when you do start learning and reading and taking in that information, when you can start to engage in those conversations and have a perspective, and you can get that volley back and forth of like, oh, well, I read on, whatever cited article, or, something, like you have someone to talk to that is in that community and impacted. So for example, I don't identify as trans. So I do not pretend to understand the struggles that they have. However, as an ally, I try to show up for them how they need me to. And so I'm not going to them and asking them, what are your current struggles and what do you need from me? I'm educating myself on, what's in the news, what are the issues that are really a problem for this community, and how can I help bring information to light? How can I help engage in those conversations? And then as I am engaging with people from the trans community, like, it's a conversation. It's not that I'm looking for you to educate me or inform me. So there are so many, because it all just is based on like what communities like you are looking to educate yourself on.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think education is so key, and educating yourself, whether you do that through being open and asking questions, whether you are reading, whether you are, and when I say being open and asking questions, you need to be thoughtful about the questions you ask.
Correct.
Um, you like, I think oftentimes people feel like it's okay to ask questions about the sex life of people in the LGBTQIA community, but you wouldn't necessarily ask those same questions of, people not in that community. So when I say ask questions, that's not what I mean.
Yeah. So if people are really interested in really understanding more how to be an ally to the LGBTQ plus community, I highly recommend the book that I was talking about earlier, The Savvy Ally, because it does take you on the journey of someone who did it from the ground up. And she talks about all of those types of experiences. And if you wouldn't ask your cisgendered male colleague what about his sex life, why are you going to your, trans male colleague and asking about theirs? Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, don't ask those questions. Exactly. But I think what I appreciate a lot is that I can read something and then I can ask you for your input as somebody who has a different, closer perspective. Even like when we talk about the transgendered community, like it's not a community that you are a part, like that you don't identify as transgender, right. But there are you have a lot more access based on your social network to people who have firsthand experience, who are a part of that community. And I think for me, that's been helpful because I can continue to check myself in a safer place. And figure out, how do I advocate better? How do I understand better so that I can show up better? So, I think just kind of pulling it back, I think allyship first starts with empathy, and it starts with remembering that whatever community somebody is a part of, that is a part of their identity. It is not their identity. And we are all humans just connecting with humans. And so thinking about, like, how is it that people want to be treated? Maybe you don't always understand that perspective, but like, just understanding we all want to be seen, we all want to be heard, we all want space for us at the table, we want to see ourselves represented out there, we want it to be safe for us to go out and live our lives freely in a way that feels true to ourselves. And if you start with that in mind, I feel like you will put yourself on a good path.
I agree. And being aware that a lot of times people may be like testing the waters, putting little things out there. So like for the LGBTQ plus community, it could just be like, I may not be out at work, but I may start talking about, hearing on the news about something that happened. And from that, I'm getting a temperature check about my colleagues and what they may think about, the LGBTQ plus community. I would also say when people are educating themselves, like, be aware of what you're Googling. If you're Googling something, be aware of how you're Googling it, because what comes back could be stuff that is either going to inform and support your bias or challenge it and challenge you to think of it from a different perspective. And I highly recommend people be mindful of those things. If you have little children, if you are a teacher in classes, like, teaching and being mindful of the language that you use, it does create and inform. And it's either encouraging people to be who they are or encouraging them to hide and be afraid of what potentially could harm them if they let it come to light. So I think it's just those small things. And again, being an ally can be something small, or it can be something that's much bigger and much more. But it's finding what is right for you, what is right in the connection that you feel with the community. But it does just start with understanding that people want to be people.
That's really interesting that you say that. Just as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about a lot of like the history lessons that I learned growing up. And there were a lot of really strong female characters from who, some of which look like me, some of which don't look like me, but a lot of really strong historical female figures that were taught about during my like elementary years growing up. And none of the teachers ever connected that back to, so you're female, you can do whatever you want. But I do think it ingrained in me this sort of belief that that was not an obstacle for me. And so I take that for granted, whereas that was not something that generations that came before me got the benefit of. Right. And so, I love how you're talking about, if you're a teacher, like, be aware of, the space that you're creating. I know, especially where I live, that's become more and more contentious, what teachers can and can't say and do, and how they can refer to students, and, all those kinds of things, which is really, really tough to grapple with. But there are ways that you can, whether you're a teacher or a friend or, whatever the case may be, where you can create a safe space without having to call it out. Just by how you show up in the world and the things that you choose to talk about and the examples that you choose to bring forward. And there's an author that I really like that writes like science fiction fantasy geared towards like middle school aged kids. So it's like right up my alley. But Rick Riordan, and he has these series that he's written, and then he also has some other authors that he kind of has sponsored in his Rick Riordan Presents, and I think there's like some mentorship that goes into that. But in these books, there are characters that have gender fluidity, that like are not your normal cisgendered like main characters, and I really appreciate that. It's just kind of naturally a part of the story. It's not like, oh, this is what we're focusing on. It's just that's one aspect of the character. Yeah. And I think that's an example of how like Rick has shown up as an ally in the world to just subconsciously put this out there in a way that helps even me see an example of how this is a part of somebody, but it is
Right.
not their whole identity. And so you don't fixate on that because there's so much else that the character has going on and that they bring to the table. And then, there are people that can read that and see themselves in
Right.
that,
Exactly.
which is fantastic.
Well, and it's not an unconscious thing for him to write it that way.
Exactly.
And so I think that's like when you talk about that allyship piece, it is like I am
That's expert level.
exactly, exactly. It is like I know that this is how I want to write this and I don't want to make it the plot point. It is just a fact of the character. Like that look, when I was first coming out, I loved to see stories, right, about like strong gay characters
Yeah.
who own their power and all this stuff. And then as more movies and cinema has been being made, the characters are more sometimes very much so out there and sometimes very much so it's just like part of the plot. And I have frequently recently found myself loving that. Like,
Yeah.
oh, well, it's just a matter of fact. I mean, it is very true. Like, you never know in your life who you may be talking to. And it's not until you like double click into that character's life do you learn more about them, you know? Like,
Yeah. Absolutely. So if we just kind of come back to allyship as a whole, I'm incredibly grateful to be a part of the LGBTQ plus community, to be an ally, to be on my journey of learning. I am completely imperfect. I'm sure I've said stuff even through this conversation that I will get some redirection on. But it's always a learning journey. And I just so appreciate you helping create this safe space for me so that I can be a better human to all of the people in my life, including, other people that are members of this community. So
yeah,
thank you. And I would
absolutely.
say, if you're looking for tips on what you can do better, start with empathy, listen more than you talk, so that you can be in learning mode, not because, we just need to shut up and have, the underserved educate us, but empathy starts with understanding, and to
Right.
understand, you have to hear. So be open to hearing and share the mic with trans and BIPOC voices. They are particularly repressed, like being attacked.
Marginalized.
Yeah, marginalized. Thank you. That would be the word I was looking for. They are particularly marginalized right now, and show up, not just in June. We celebrate Pride Month in June because it needs a month to celebrate, to party, but to fight, to recognize that equal rights don't exist today and that
That's
there
right.
is more that we need to do, that not even just rights, but space in the community, the things that many people take for granted just
Yep.
don't exist. And so we need the space to educate, but, Pride happens all year long.
That's right.
So we're grateful that June is a month specifically to focus and celebrate and educate and advocate and, all of those things, and celebrate, but show up, not just in June. Vote with your wallet, make smart choices, and particularly think about if you're investing dollars into places that are using profits to suppress or repress marginalized individuals. Think about that, because it happens more than you would know. So educate yourself and vote with your wallet, and protect our youth because they are particularly vulnerable and they rely on us to help shape the way that they think and their beliefs and their core. And like Chris, I'm just so grateful that you shared a little bit of just a small window of what
Yeah.
that experience was like for you growing up. So,
It always gets me choked up when I think about it because had I had that opportunity or people who, I don't know, like where I felt like I could be my full authentic self, like where could I be? What could I be? And
oh,
not that I am not like happy
you
for
are
where I am in
thriving.
life and all of those things, but it's like those hard life lessons that I could have learned earlier in life that were
Yeah.
pushed off by a few years. And it's also just knowing that there is something out there for you. There is hope, there is success, love. We all want that, right? Like those are the basic things in life that we all strive for. So I want to underline the protect our youth because resources are being taken away and things that people can and cannot say are being very much so hardlined in certain spaces. Please, please.
Yeah, wherever you are in space and time, on the emotional journey of how you feel about things, like just know that there are vulnerable youth out there that just need a supportive, judgment-free place where they can not feel bad about themselves and who they are. Create that space
Yep.
whenever you can, wherever possible. And then just final note, it's not about perfection. It is about being on the journey. It's about being open. It is about being in constant motion, learning. It's not about waiting until you have it all figured out to move forward, but move forward with what was it that I was told back in the time of COVID, and I was having to make a decision about, does my kid go to class in person, or does my kid stay home? Like, what do we do? And the advice I was given was, Jen, you need to make the best decision you can with the information that you have at the time that you have it, but you must take action.
Yep.
Because not taking action is decision. And that's like very logical. But I go back to that advice and I apply it to a lot of things. Like, okay, I have educated myself. I know that there is more for me to learn, but I'm going to make the best decision I can with the information I have at the moment. And I'm going to start moving forward, and I'm going to keep educating myself and surround myself with people that will challenge my thinking and help validate the direction that I'm on as well, so I can have more and more confidence and move forward. So don't be afraid to be an ally.
Yeah. And one final quote from The Savvy Ally, because I highly recommend. Allies are mighty and necessary force for any social justice movement. When you look back on all the social justice movements, there have been people who are not part of those marginalized communities who have helped move it forward, whether it's been, very overtly or covertly. So be an ally. They're needed. And I appreciate all my allies. So thank you, Jen, for engaging in this conversation. This is something that we do together, and we try to create content that we can both be proud of and we both want our names on. And I'm proud of it, and I'm so excited to get to do this with you.
Same.
So share with us, like, how do you show up as an ally? What information would you share with us based on what we've shared? You can, depending on the platform you're listening to us on, you can throw a comment in. You can also reach out to us via email at chrisjeninthemorning@gmail.com. You can also leave a voicemail or text us at 940. Just about all the social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Come find us, Chris and Jen ITM. ITM stands for In the Morning. And be sure to like, follow, subscribe, comment, all of those fun things, because we got more fun Pride content coming out.
Yes, comment. We want to hear from you. We will read everything you share. So please drop us a comment and share your thoughts. Tell us what you think. Give us something to think about. We would absolutely love that. And we hope you have a fantastic week.
All right. Bye, everyone.